So we fast forward into adulthood, and I do remember that, I remember it quite well,
Yes.
actually. Seeing the trailers, like, oh, there it is. So, and what I remember finding really interesting is I remember seeing it at a certain place in Toronto. This is we're going to start getting a little bit into spooky stuff now, because I was doing an article for Toronto Life magazine, and we were brought to this very interesting looking building, and I remember thinking, oh, this is really interesting if the trailer's outside. So anyway, didn't think about it much beyond that, but what an amazing place. And before we get to that, I just want to let everybody know, get ready for that, because you're going to want to hear all about that one. But being younger, having these big families, living all over the place, paranormal experiences. You had to have had paranormal experiences, traveling
Well,
everywhere.
strangely, my first paranormal experience had nothing to do with my grandfather's side of the family that ran a carnival. It was my other
Right.
grandfather's side of the family.
Okay.
My grandfather McClelland, who was my dad's father, was a Queen's Bench judge. And when we had family gatherings at his place, there was a lot of people that would come to the house. Like, this is in the late 60s, early 70s. And because there was so many people coming to the house, there wasn't enough bedrooms for everybody. So some people stayed on couches. But because I was the oldest child in my family, I was allotted the basement on a cot.
Nice.
And
nice.
so, yeah, well, it wasn't really scared of the dark or anything. I didn't have that kind of problem as a child.
Right.
So I slept in the basement. But what happened was, one night I was laying in bed. It must have been around 11:30 in the evening. I had probably been laying there since 9 o'clock in the evening, just kind of like enjoying the ambiance upstairs, because you could hear the parents tittering and laughing and enjoying their game of canasta or whatever the hell they were doing upstairs.
Every family had to do the canasta.
Yeah,
was
it
no
was
different.
bridge or canasta. What the hell? I don't understand it these days. Who plays that? But back then that was very popular. So I hear that, but there was a point at around 11 in the evening where I heard the voices still, and it was, it sounded like everybody was having a great time upstairs. What I discovered the next morning was my parents and everyone had gone to bed at 10. And so at 11 o'clock, when I was hearing these voices, these weren't my family. I was actually hearing other voices from beyond the realm. And I, without thinking, and because I wasn't scared, was okay with this. And it was very strange and very, very surreal, because once I made the realization, because I was a kid, I was only 9 when this took place. I was in the basement, and I was listening to laughter and voices from a completely different dimensional plane. And it wasn't my family. And it wasn't, I don't know if it was good or malevolent. I couldn't tell you. But that was my very, very first experience with paranormal activity.
Exactly? How old were you? How old were you?
I was 9.
9. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. They broke you in nice and early.
Yes. Well, finally, by the time I was 16, I should say, when I was 16, my friend Charles Porlier, who is known as a very famous special effects artist in Hollywood, he was the makeup artist for Christopher Reeve, who was in Superman, for all the time that he was alive, and also did all the special effects and everything for 13 Ghosts and Ghost Ship and a few other great Hollywood.
Love that movie too.
Yes,
yeah, those are well done.
Kill scenes ever. But that being said, Charles contacted me when I was 16. He was at the time 21. He was a few years older than me. He knew I loved horror, and he had contacted me and he said, Scott, and the butler was still living there. So he didn't want the house sold, and he decided to kill anybody that came in. So you were being taken through the house by a psychopath.
Nice.
And I played the butler.
I see.
Now, the thing is we had a makeup room. The kitchen had been turned completely into a large black maze. So we
Right.
gutted the kitchen, and it became these little tiny hallways that would make you completely like disoriented. But
Mhm.
our makeup room was in the floor. So there's those old floor hinge doors that
Yes.
would take you to the basement. There was
Yes.
one of those in the floor. So I was probably a week into doing the Cane Manor at this point, and I opened up the door, and there was a light on downstairs. I could hear voices down there talking. I was pretty sure that other people were still getting their makeup on, which means I wasn't that late because I was afraid I was late. And I got downstairs, and when I got to the bottom stair, I noted there was nobody in the basement, and all the sound stopped completely.
Mm.
Well, I turned on my heel and started running up the stairs. And as I started running up the stairs, right behind me, was the sound of footsteps. And because I was running up into the maze, it was already pitch black. I had to run through the maze with these footsteps behind me. I couldn't see a thing. And it exited out into the living room, which was done up like a Victorian living room. Well, I come running out, and I'm in a panic. And Charles is sitting there, and he goes, "You're late." And I go, "I'm sorry, but I can't seem to get downstairs. There's something keeping me from actually getting my makeup on." And he laughed at that and thought that I was just fucking around. Well, I wasn't. I finally had him come down with me, kind of holding my hand, as it were. And I put on the makeup, and I went and I did my job.
Mm-hmm.
There was one night, because we would work until 2 a.m, and then we would close and we'd do cleanup. There was one night we were there at 3 a.m. We had done our cleanup, and me and Charles were sitting in the living room talking, and there was an old clock on the mantle, and it was a beautiful old ornate clock, and it dinged 3 times. It was dong, 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 and I was like, "That's such a cool clock." And Charles went, "That isn't supposed to happen." I said, What are you talking about? It's just a beautiful old clock." He goes, "Pick it up for a second." I picked it up and I turned it around. It was an old clock that had been gutted. It was just there for looks. It was just a prop.
Right.
It had no interior. There was no clockwork inside of it, nor a bell to ding.
Right.
And it went off 3 times. So we were experiencing poltergeist activity, clairaudience. We were experiencing so many different things in that place, and here we are supposedly haunting it for fun for the public.
Right.
Little did they know
the spirits are getting into it.
A real haunted house.
Right. Right. And he had no idea when he chose this house that it
had no idea. It was a house that was up for demolition, so we actually got to tear out some walls and put in like moving bookcases and everything.
Right.
Like that. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But it's something I'll never forget.
Right.
And it was my second biggest thing that ever happened to me.
Right.
Until in
Toronto.
2000, I moved into a mansion in Toronto.
Okay. Oh, well, I know.
Yes.
It's a beautiful house, but looks are deceiving, right?
Yes. It was a large mansion on Lakeshore Boulevard, and it was in the area of Mimico in Toronto. And the first night I was there was not to live. It was actually to start fixing the house up and painting it and prepping it before I brought my furniture in. Okay. And I was painting until around 3 or 4 in the morning. And all I had was my bed spring, not the actual full bed, and it was just in the bedroom, but nothing else was there. And I was dead tired. It was around 4 in the morning by the time I had done. And I went to lay my head down on the pillow, and as I did, my pillow started whispering to me. I took my head away, and the whispering stopped immediately. And then I brought my head back down. I took my head away. I did this 3 times. And then I was like, I sat up straight and I said, okay, look, I'm moving in here. And if we're going to cohabitate here together, you're going to have to allow me to sleep and rest
Mhm.
because you don't know my background.
Mhm.
And if you piss me off, I'm going to smudge the hell out of you.
Right.
And you won't be a happy ghost.
Right. Right.
And so when I
Be
basically had my
forewarned.
little tete-a-tete with whatever was whispering through my pillow,
Mhm.
it stopped for
But
that.
did you know that you were moving into a haunted place? Because most of these old places, everybody
Yes.
assumes are haunted, but not
Well,
always necessarily
the
the case.
rental price was really low. I was renting
Okay.
the house.
Okay.
Of course, I'm an artist. I could not afford to buy a mansion, so
Right.
I was renting this house. And when I went for the first day, the very first day that I went, the realtor said, "We have to knock on the door because the lady that lives here is still moving things out." Ultimately.